Good afternoon, friends of folk music. My name is Tom Perotti. I'm the Education and Community Outreach Director for Common Fence Music, and I'm here today talking to the very talented Ethan Leinwand, the St. Louis-style barrel house piano player and preservationist. It's a beautiful day in Middletown here, Ethan. What's the weather like?
It's a hot day here in St. Louis. The heat has arrived, and it's not going anywhere.
Well, I want to start with a little bit about your early days. You're from Middletown, Connecticut. What can you tell me about?
Well, I grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, and I started taking piano lessons as a young kid. People always want to ask you, when you started playing piano. It's a question they love to ask. I started when I was 8, and I took sort of normal piano lessons, normal kid piano lessons, till I was about 13, and then I quit, kind of like everybody else. But I wasn't quitting music. I had already sort of developed a personal relationship with the piano. I was really interested in writing music. I wanted to be a film composer for forever. That was sort of my dream. And so I'd write all this sort of cinematic type music on the piano and learn about it, I guess. So that kind of kept me going forward for a long time.
Did you have a particular teacher early on that inspired you?
Well, I had one piano teacher. Her name was Mrs. Fredericks, and she let me kind of learn what I wanted to learn. And if I came in that week and I just made up my own song, she loved that too. She would bring me some classical stuff and some sort of contemporary young adult jazz music that people were writing. So she had a wide range, and she, whatever it was, she would let me try to learn it. So I really appreciated that.
Now, you told me you have a general interest in history, and what did that have to do with your journey?
Well, when I went to college, I quickly came into crisis as a piano player, like those kind of places, those schools, and you meet these young kids who seem to got it all figured out. And there was a simplicity to my music. There always was a lyricism that I felt very overwhelmed. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and they have a strong, avant-garde jazz tradition and experimental music and all the stuff that I didn't really relate to, only enough to make it hurt my feelings like I was doing something wrong. But I discovered there a love of music history, classical music history, actually, at college. And it was just something about the ways in which it kept changing, the ways in which you didn't have classical music until you had, this Mozart and Beethoven to remember, and then how everyone reacted against that and said, this is the thing. And that keeps the way it keeps changing and stuff. So that love of history and reading about it and thinking critically about it is really what got me going on the barrel house when I first discovered New Orleans rhythm and blues, and then boogie woogie, and then what came before that, and really just trying to understand that journey.
And so I've got a list of your favorite performing artists here: Little Brother Montgomery, Black Bob, Jimmy Yancey, Henry Brown, Petey Wheatstraw, Aaron Pinetop Sparks, Albert Ammons, I've heard his name, Robert Shaw, Cooney Vaughn, Professor Longhair, I've heard of him, and Carl Sonny Leyland. At what point were you really digging into the works of these particular artists?
Well, it's an ongoing process. So when I was 25, I had lived in New Orleans for a brief time and taught music there, but I had moved up to Brooklyn, where my brother was, and most of my friends and my support network was. And I got into boogie woogie first. And so I was mostly watching YouTube videos and seeing people's fingers and being like, that's the sound I was looking for. That's that complete statement. I think I talked about that in the concert. And so it started with boogie woogie. And my first real love was Jimmy Yancey, the great Chicago poet. So the process has been slow. At that point, I probably would, if I had listened to Little Brother Montgomery, I wouldn't have liked it. Some of the stride elements, some of those more, I guess, jazz and ragtime feelings. I was really trying to avoid that. So it's kind of like as I began to explore more in the piano and wanted to get a different set of skill sets, say a stride set or these different things, that's when I would discover the next guy, and they would take me on through the next period. So right now I'm pretty deep in the Texas guys like Robert Shaw. I've been listening a lot to, and always Little Brother Montgomery. Those guys.
And so where did you head after Brooklyn?
After Brooklyn, I was in Brooklyn for 6 years, and that's where I got my start as a piano player. I had just started to learn this music, and I thought I was at a party and there was a piano there, and I said, for the first time ever in my life, I said, I'm going to be that guy. And I'm going to sit down at that piano and play. And I still needed to get sort of cajoled by my friends. But when I did it, it was like, the happiest moment for me. It was like this sort of realization that this is what I want to do. So there happened to be someone there who was building a piano bar. And so 6 months later, they called me up and gave me that job. So I was working in New York at that bar. That's kind of what gave me my break, I guess, and gave me like those 4-hour gigs. And then, but I was really getting into the St. Louis style piano blues. So I was falling in love with it. Such a strong sound, this great accompaniment, low down piano sound. So I reached out to some people in St. Louis and discovered that there was really a lot going on here. There was a singer who goes by Miss Jubilee. Her name is Valerie Kirchhoff, that wanted to sing that old St. Louis blues. And there was so much piano history here. That was the other thing that surprised me. When I came down here to visit, I played piano and they said, oh, that's not even boogie woogie. That's like earlier barrel house. And like, nowhere else, or even in the country, knows what boogie woogie is. Like when I was in Brooklyn, I was feeling like I was starting to really get a handle on the blues in a deep way, not a superficial way. And I finished a song that I thought like, well, that's deep blues, that is it. And they'd say, someone would be like, oh, great stride, great ragtime. And it broke my heart, that people didn't have that ear for this kind of music, but here they'd grown up listening to it. They'd heard Roosevelt Sykes and Johnny Johnson, who was Chuck Berry's piano player. I mean, he lived till 2001 here. We had another guy, Henry Townsend, that he started recording in 1929 and lived till 2005, recording in 8 straight decades. So there was all this frame of reference here to the blues and the different styles, and the piano history was so deep that people just right away were into what I was doing and felt like there was a place for me here. So I visited here for a week, and 2 months later I moved here. I bought a one-way ticket and I was here.
I want to move away from St. Louis for a moment and then come back, but the barrel houses, as you've told me, were developed on the work camps in the Deep South, which were male-dominated. I read somewhere the barrel house was designed to get you dancing, but these were bars without women, if I understand correctly.
Well, I'm sure the women made their way there, but and so I mean, it's a good question, and like it's. I'm not entirely sure. I know some of the players who really like to play for the women didn't like to play at the barrel houses. And I think there's the connection there, for sure. But I think the women would find their way, especially, women of ill repute, as they say.
And I would imagine, and apparently I'm wrong, that pianos would not have been readily available. And yet these barrel houses had pianos.
Sure. I mean, by the 1900s, and by the 1910s and 20s, pianos were everywhere. They were cheap. They were getting churned out. There were so many piano makers in this country, and there was such a need for it and such a demand, that really they were everywhere because, you're at this sweet spot. The piano has this real sweet spot in American history. And the way I look at it is like after the Industrial Revolution, so you can make them, and before the jukebox. When all of a sudden you're electric, you don't need it anymore. So in that time in between, especially if you throw in Prohibition, when you have to be kind of underground or in different, people's apartments and things like that, the piano becomes king.
You had mentioned to me that a lot of these performers were in their mid-teens when they started to make a name for themselves on the road, and they were cross-pollinating as they met each other. They were taking trains everywhere. And they were playing the piano. So somewhere around the house or in the neighborhood or in the community, they had a piano to practice on.
Yep. Most people say their dad had one, their uncle had one. They'd go there and there. I mean, I wish I've had the chance to talk to more of these guys, and learn about what their process of learning, if they remember hearing a piano roll or what so and so taught them, and how they actually learned, Be cool
now, so back to St. Louis. What drew this music to St. Louis? How did it develop there?
Well, St. Louis, is kind of always been this sort of perfect meeting point of the South and the North and the East and the West and so many different things. And so you have, W.C. Handy's first story of hearing the blues is not the slide guitar player in the, in the Delta. It's hearing the songs on the levee, while he tried to sleep on the cobblestones in St. Louis. And so all the way back then, when you had all the people working on the riverboats, and then all the trains went through East St. Louis. So it was always a major hub in that way. And then it was the cradle of ragtime. So by the 1890s, you had the first African-American, Tom Turpin, who ever published a rag, was from St. Louis. That's the Harlem Rag. Joplin moved there a few years later. And it was this musical hub where sort of this urban and rural styles started to really mix. And I think the blues owes a lot to St. Louis, and we've lost that a little bit in our story. That's become so Delta focused, and I'm not taking away from that, but we're losing a little too much of the story, I think. When we
Very
focus
interesting.
on Charlie Patton and Robert Johnson so much. Yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you for that. You mentioned some venues, Schlafly's, Evangeline's, where you play a Sunday brunch, and the Casa Loma Ballroom. Do any of those three go back?
Oh yeah, Casa Loma Ballroom. Cap Calloway played at Casa Loma Ballroom. Has a long history. I played a blues club called BB's Jazz, Blues, and Soups that has a great history in St. Louis. And Roosevelt Sykes helped christen the stage with Yank Rochelle and Henry Townsend. And so, and that was like a huge blues hub here, for and still is. I mean,
and so
we're in trouble, but
let's talk about Valerie Kirchhoff, Miss Jubilee of the Ya Boys.
Yes,
She recognized your fine talents, and you've hooked up. And
well, we were both. Valerie. Yeah, we were in a situation where the music we both loved independently of ourselves was piano vocal, female vocal music. And there's so much of that in St. Louis that came out of St. Louis, this low down plaintive style that is so beautiful and deep, but also not virtuosic for the singer or the piano player. So it's not music that if you're really out to become a good singer or a good musician or a good piano player, you're gonna gloss over this stuff. So both of us independently fell in love with this music from me from the piano, her from the vocals. And when we discovered, and she's the first person I ever met who loved this music, ever. So, I mean, this music for me, I didn't get into, it's pretty clear from my concert that I did not get into this music to make friends. It was not a social thing for me. So this was like coming to St. Louis and meeting her was kind of the beginnings of music being a social thing at all for me. And finding someone I could talk to about this music at all. So she's a really great singer. She started of early blues and jazz. She did jump blues for a long time, and she's really beloved in this city. St. Louis, we don't have much of a national reputation. There's a lot of great music coming on in this town, traditional musics of all kinds, but we have an insular thing. Our fan base is locals. It's not a tourist kind of thing. So we just have our local fans, and she, more than anyone, has done a lot over the last dozen years to help build a following for young music, and brought out a lot of young players who are now making a living here playing music because of the work she did.
Well, I haven't yet heard her, but I look forward to seeking her out.
Yes. St. Louis Steady Grinders.
All right. Yeah, that's the duo that you have.
That's the duo that really focuses on that style of music. Yeah. And then our band, we have bass and trumpet and a clarinet and things like that. And we get a little more into the obscure swinging blues of the 30s, particularly. Okay. And so we'll really run the gamut from the early Bessie Smith and Victoria Spivey to Merlene Johnson of the 30s. And no one remembers Merlene Johnson, but she's awesome.
Now, so we're having this conversation because of COVID-19. What impact is that having on you? It's a real honor, by the way, for me to be able to talk to you. But what impact is this all having on you?
Well, the impact is having on all musicians. I'm an out of work musician. All my venues have closed, and if they're starting to open back up, but I'm not quite ready to go back, I think. And all the festivals are gone, and so it's been a huge change from, in St. Louis, I work a ton, I have a lot of projects. I do the solo work, the band work. I have a bunch of different duo projects. I play in a band called the Bottle Snakes with a guitar player, and we do the piano guitar blues. But that all keeps you busy, and I'm a lucky problem to have, where I was working, most nights of the week. And so that's all gone. So it's allowed a chance to kind of take a break and relax for a minute and figure out, you know, what I want to do moving forward and how I want to have my career and shape my career. Because I think about that constantly, really. It's been my obsession. It's just like how to build a sustainable career as a musician. And it's really scary to try to figure it out. And this sort of just destroyed the whole thing. So now it's sort of, you're kind of in a wait and see approach. I think that's where a lot of us are. You don't know.
Well, you strike me, you're a talented player, but you also have an interest in scholarship. I see you as an ethnomusicologist. I understand you've learned your skills on the street, but I would say this guy's an ethnomusicologist.
Well,
what goals do you have in that field?
Well, I think that's the route towards a sustainable career, and it's something I think about a lot. Is making it about education. Education is in my family. That's not music. My blood is education. My dad travels the world teaching math teachers and developing, you know, curriculum there. He's been fighting that uphill battle for a long time about improving math education. My brother is a teaching artist in Brooklyn and teaches at Brooklyn College, early development education for art. If I wasn't a player, I would be deeply involved in the music education, trying to shape that in either the school I was teaching at or in the country. So education means more to me. And I feel like we sometimes forget, and we think like the way to move this music forward is to play it for people and show them how cool it is and how great it is. But really it's to teach them about that and get them excited and wanting to hear it and maybe giving them a beginner piece of music. And so the focus on education and seeing if I can, you know, lecture about this music. And it seems like the most fulfilling and sustainable path forward.
We're getting close to the end of our time, but you kind of segued into my next question. What would be your message to young music students?
I think my main message to young music students is to just not be in such a rush to post your music online. Just take it, you know, I see it all the time. I see these young kids and it's cool, they're doing it. You know, they're on their bad sounding keyboard and they're working at it. But what happens is, as soon as you play and post any music, everyone is going to come out and tell you how great you are. It's what happens with music. You play it at any level, people tell you you're great. And if you start to believe that or think that that's true, if it's not true, or even if it is true, it's the wrong path forward, because it doesn't keep you really invested in the process of what you need to be doing to get better. So I wish a few more musicians would wait for that moment that they've really put in their work and gotten to that place, and I think, and then started sharing it and having when they have something to say, and not on a keyboard, please.
Beautiful. So you've got a record to your one album to your credit at the moment. It's got enough material. It's got one solo album, and it's got enough material on it for two. The Lowdown Piano Blues. Do I have that right?
That's the Lowdown Piano.
The Lowdown Piano.
Yep.
Where can folks find that?
You can get that through iTunes or stream it on Spotify. You can also listen to the Bottle Snakes record, which is called Candy Shop, and that's an album of all instrumental original tunes for piano, guitar, or Miss Jubilee and the Yas Yas Boys. We just released Cool It If You Can, and that's available on Bandcamp. We'll make a physical copy when the time is right, but we recorded it right before this all went down. We went to Bristol, Tennessee, and recorded a record through tape, no digital, you know, completely analog, live mixed, and it's got a warm, wonderful sound. And I was gonna make a solo record in March, but we see where that went. But I tried to do it last year. I wasn't quite happy with it, but I'm feeling ready again to get it done.
Well, as I said, this has been a great honor and a pleasure. I have to thank my partner, Ed Neri, the artistic director of Common Fence Music, for introducing me to you. I owe you more than a lunch, and we won't tell the audience why that is. But thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to hearing your concert again on Sunday evening, June 7th. And of course, this will run afterwards. Thank you, Ethan. Ethan Leinwand. All right, salute. I know we'll be hearing more from you.
Hope so.
All right.